Each night, as the world sleeps, the Middle East awakens on the edge of catastrophe. This is not a conflict over land or oil, it is a battle over the soul of an entire region. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of a familiar geopolitical map, or the dawn of new powers rising from the ashes? Let's embark on a journey to understand one of the most complex regions on Earth. In this video, we not just recounting events, we diving deep into one of the most dangerous and escalating conflicts in the region, the existential clash between Iran and Israel. This is not a mere border skirmish or routine military tension. It is a convergence of grand political projects, clashing ideologies, and tangled international and regional alliances. The historical roots of the conflict. How did it begin? What were the turning points? Core interests and strategic motives. What does Iran want? What is Israel aiming for? And what role does the US play? Global and regional power stakes. China, Russia, the Gulf states, and Turkey. Possible scenarios. What might unfold? What factors could tip the scales? The catastrophic ramifications for regional security, the global economy, and civilian populations. Final insights, who always ends up paying the price, and what hope remains. This analytical journey demands your full attention. Get ready to open files you've never seen before. The Middle East is more than headlines, it's history in motion. Subscribe to Morik channel and see the full picture. To understand the present, we must journey back in time. The relationship between Iran and Israel wasn't always hostile. Prior to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, there were quasi-normal relations, unofficial alignment even under the Shah. Iran viewed Israel as a potential ally against Arab nationalism and regional communism. There were discreet trade exchanges and indirect intelligence cooperation. However, the 1979 revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini turned the tables entirely. Iran shifted from a Western ally to a revolutionary state, embracing the slogan, "Neither East nor West, an Islamic Republic," no longer dealing with a pragmatic Persian monarchy. Israel now faced a theocratic regime threatening annihilation. Central to its political doctrine became the liberation of Jerusalem and the rejection of Israel, which was labeled a cancerous tumor and illegitimate occupier. These were not mere slogans, they translated into active support for resistance movements across the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and various Palestinian factions. From Israel's standpoint, the Islamic Republic posed an existential threat. No longer dealing with a pragmatic Persian monarchy, Israel now faced a theocratic regime threatening annihilation. This fear intensified with Iran's nuclear program. For Israel, even a peaceful nuclear capability is a red line, as it threatens its military superiority in the region. Thus began a transition from shadow warfare to direct confrontation. Analyzing the key stakeholders in this conflict reveals a sobering truth. People as interests are rarely part of the equation. Political rhetoric, from Washington to Tehran and Tel Aviv, centers on the Iranian regime, its nuclear program, military influence, and regional proxies. But where is the discourse about the Iranian people? About their economic suffering under sanctions? About basic civil liberties and the women who bravely protested in Tehran and beyond, demanding freedom from mandatory veiling and oppression? Where is the concern for Iran's marginalized ethnic minorities, the Awazi Arabs, the Kurds, the Baloch who face systemic discrimination and poverty? Or the youth suicide crisis, the escalating water scarcity, the crumbling outskirts of Iran? What of Mahsa Amini, whose tragic death shook the world and exposed the regime's brutality? Let's be clear, Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed deal-maker, had no interest in democracy or human rights in the Middle East. His policy was purely transactional, serving what he defined as America first. His methods, economic sanctions, Twitter threats, blunt rhetoric, and unprecedented military escalations culminated in a direct strike on Iran. It was more political theater than strategic warfare, yet the message was loud and clear: the US is here and ready to escalate. But do these pressures actually deter Tehran? Or do they fuel further extremism, increase internal repression, and inch the region toward an even greater implosion. History shows excessive external pressure often strengthens authoritarian regimes from within. The neglect of people as voices on both sides is the very fuel that sustains the silence around human rights, dragging the region deeper into chaos. Now, let's look ahead. What might follow this intensifying Iran-Israel tension under the shadow of international involvement? Iran is unlikely to retreat easily. It sees this as a battle for regime survival. Its goal? Prolong the conflict to exhaust adversaries and extract concessions. Tactical compromises on nuclear enrichment may be offered, but never a full dismantlement. In return, Tehran will demand sanctions relief and international legitimacy, its lifeline to regime continuity. Its regional network Hezbollah, Houthis, Iraqi militias is non-negotiable. Iran is not Syria, it's a well-armed regional power with elite forces, missile technology, and a web of proxies. If this escalates, it could last years, draining everyone involved. Can Iran withstand Israel's tech-driven military and US dominance? Western powers are poised for involvement. The US is already engaged, and others France, the UK, Germany may follow despite Iran's strength. It cannot match a multilateral coalition economically, militarily, or digitally. A full-scale war could topple the Islamic Republic, especially if no diplomatic off-ramp is pursued. This scenario, while dangerous, is increasingly likely given the entrenched positions of all parties. The conflict is not just a binary one between Iran and Israel. There are other major players, some operating silently and others overtly, each with their own interests and motives that influence the course of events. Russia views Iran as a crucial strategic ally in confronting US expansion and NATO, especially in sensitive files like Syria and Ukraine. Tehran provides Russia with strategic depth in the Middle East. However, Russia deep down doesn't mind a relative weakening of Iran as long as it doesn't completely collapse and disappear from the scene. Russia wants a flexible ally that can be controlled, not a strong competitor in the region that might threaten its interests in the energy market or its military influence. For its part, China views Iran as a vital corridor in its massive economic project, the Belt and Road Initiative. It has signed a 25-year strategic agreement with Iran, involving billions of dollars in investments across the oil, trade, and infrastructure sectors. However, unlike Moscow, Beijing prioritizes stability over chaos. Therefore, it does not want an escalation that would undermine its massive economic interests in the region, but it also won't risk a direct military confrontation with the West for Tehran's sake. In conclusion, China and Russia will play behind-the-scenes roles to moderate the pace of the conflict, and they will work to prevent a complete collapse that could harm their interests. However, they will not intervene militarily to save Iran. Instead, they will only act to protect their vital interests and ensure the continued flow of energy. Turkey is one of the countries most concerned about the scenario of the Iranian regime's collapse. Why? Because Turkey is a nation with significant regional ambitions, deep imperial roots, the Ottoman Caliphate, and constantly tries to assert its presence in hotspots across the region, from Libya to the Caucasus. The fall of Iran would place Turkey in direct confrontation with the increasing movements of Israel and the Gulf states, and it would open the door for the expansion of ethnic groups that Ankara considers an existential threat. Chief among them, the Kurds. The Kurds in Iran constitute a large component with a long history of struggle against central authority. Should the Iranian regime begin to collapse, it is highly probable that Iranian Kurdistan would be the first to move politically and militarily to declare self-governance or even independence, similar to what happened in Iraqi and Syrian Kurdistan. This represents a nightmare for Erdogan, who sees any Kurdish expansion as a threat to his country's unity. Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, view Iran as a primary source of instability in the region due to its interventions in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Therefore, some of them might see a weakening or collapse of the Iranian regime as an opportunity to achieve stability. However, at the same time, they fear any widespread chaos that might result from such a collapse, which could extend to their borders and affect their security. Thus, they will intervene to protect their interests, whether security-wise, economically, or even militarily in some areas, as seen in Syria. If the scenario of the Iranian regime's collapse materializes, which is no longer unlikely, its repercussions will not be limited to Iran but will encompass the entire region, and its implications will be profound and widespread. Iran does not represent only itself. It presents itself as the leader of the Shia world in the region and globally. Its collapse would leave a colossal political and sectarian vacuum, especially with the decline of Assad's regime in Syria, Hezbollah's weakening in Lebanon after successive crises, the increasing disarray within Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces factions, and escalating pressure on the Houthis in Yemen. This collapse could fundamentally reshape sectarian alliances. However, the fall of this regime does not necessarily mean a decisive victory for the Sunni axis or any other. Instead, it might open the door to new chaos, unforeseen alliances, and a fierce struggle among powers to fill the void. Nevertheless, the balance might tip more significantly towards the Sunni axis for years to come, potentially marking the beginning of a decline in the exhausting sectarian conflict that has plagued the region for centuries. The Kurds in Iran constitute a large component and possess a long history of struggle against central authority. Should the Iranian regime begin to collapse, it is highly probable that Iranian Kurdistan would be the first to move politically and militarily to declare. We must also not forget the Awazis, the marginalized Arab ethnicity in southwestern Iran, and the Lurs and the Baloch in the southeast, who await the opportune moment to reclaim their suppressed identity and rights. There is also the historical Iranian opposition, such as the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran (MEK), which Washington removed from its terrorist list, as well as figures like Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son of the late Shah of Iran, who enjoys support from a segment of Iranians abroad and could have a potential role in the future. Resurfaced regional disputes. One cannot ignore the dispute over the Greater and Lesser Tons Islands between Iran and the UAE, which might resurface forcefully, potentially serving as an entry point for direct Emirati intervention, be it security, economic, or even military. The latent dispute between Saudi Arabia and Iran has manifested in proxy wars in Yemen and other areas, will become more overtly apparent. The other, harsher side of any conflict is the humanitarian and economic suffering. Imagine the closure of the Strait of Hormuz alone, the vital artery for exporting approximately 20% of the world's oil. This could lead to an unprecedented wave of global inflation and a significant surge in energy prices. Estimates suggest that oil prices could jump by 20 to 30% within a few days if the strait is fully closed. This would mean a global economic crisis affecting every household and every individual. As for Iran internally and neighboring countries, the results would be catastrophic by all measures: millions of refugees and internally displaced persons, a complete collapse of infrastructure, a widespread increase in extreme poverty that would push millions below the poverty line, and the exacerbation of environmental and drought crises already afflicting vast areas of Iraq, Syria, Iran, and the Gulf. Let's summarize the situation in three main probable scenarios, as if they were three diverging paths. Major concessions from Iran under immense international pressure. This implies the regime's survival, but within imposed boundaries, in exchange for maintaining the minimum elements of its political system, prolonging the conflict, where Iran gambles on time and the balance of power to secure better negotiating gains later. This extends the suffering. The complete fall of the Iranian regime, which is the most dangerous scenario and perhaps the closest to realization if all parties remain intransigent. This scenario means the region would enter a long phase of chaos, immense human and economic depletion, and a complete reshaping of the Middle East's map, which could last for decades. What is happening in Iran and the region reflects not only a conflict of regimes over influence but also a dismal international failure to understand that sustainable peace and stability policies are built, first and foremost, on meeting the demands and interests of the people. Unfortunately, the major international and regional powers Trump, his administration, the international and regional community alike, none of them seem genuinely concerned with the fate of the Iranian people or other peoples of the region. Ultimately, as in all wars, the people are the ones who pay the exorbitant price, with their blood, their dignity, and the future of their children. Sometimes in politics, interests may converge, and some scenarios might benefit the people, but it often takes decades for these benefits to materialize. We could be talking about 20, 30, or even 40 years or more. Change has its costs, and these costs are often very painful and immense. Yet, despite everything, we hope that a genuine peaceful solution emerges. Not just for Israel or the Iranian regime or Turkey or any other power, but primarily for the Iranian people, a people who deserve a moderate, just government that treats all its components equally, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, or political orientation, a government that guarantees them a dignified life and contributes to the stability of the entire region, not its explosion. We live in a region that has been ravaged from every direction, in a geopolitical location that shows no mercy. The Middle East has long been and continues to be a stage for major global conflicts. This tragically reflects how authoritarian regimes think. The citizen is not seen as someone to protect or serve, but rather as someone to control, to fear, and to obey. Today, Iran appears ready to embark on a war that could claim the lives of hundreds of thousands or even more. We've seen this playbook before. The Assad regime waged such a war without hesitation, leaving behind a shattered nation and a generation of trauma. Now, we may be standing on the brink of reliving that tragedy, but on a much broader and far more dangerous scale. Meanwhile, Israel seems prepared to fight 100 wars to realize its vision regardless of the human or economic cost. Share your thoughts in the comments. What scenario do you think is most likely? Support Murik channel by subscribing and liking to receive more in-depth analyses.